Welcome to Leadership Lessons. This is a weekly interview with leaders in KBC, SBC, and beyond. My name is Todd Gray. I'm Executive Director Treasurer for Kentucky Baptist Convention. KBC was created by churches, for churches, to help churches reach Kentucky and the world for Christ. My guest today is Dr. Dan Summerlin, pastor at First Baptist Lone Oak, Kentucky since 2001. Brother Dan, is that correct?
Yeah, going on 18 years.
18, wow, wonderful. Dan grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, graduate of the University of Alabama, which requires a what?
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide. Has a Bachelor of Science in Psychology. I'd love to ask you how that has helped you in serving churches. 2 more degrees from New Orleans Seminary. But Dan pastored 3 churches in Mississippi and Alabama prior to coming to Kentucky. He's been actively involved in KBC and SBC life. Married to Eileen. They have 2 adult children. And Brother Dan has 2 grandchildren who currently reside in Florida, which is probably too far away for both grandpa and grandmother. Brother Dan, welcome to Leadership Lessons. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This is an honor.
Folks who are watching, we know some folks join us live and some folks join later. Eventually, we're going to have this content on a podcast so it can be listened to in one additional format. I can assure you this, that Brother Dan's going to have things to say that are helpful. His ministry experience and the success that God's given him will serve well those who are listening. If you have questions that you'd like to submit for consideration, just go ahead and put those into a Facebook question in the comments section, and as many of those as we can answer, we will certainly try to. Brother Dan, tell us about the first church that you pastored. Where was it, and what was it like? Give us a description of it.
Oh my goodness, my first church was in rural Mississippi. I grew up in a large church, and so I was youth minister of a large church. And so my first church pastor was a very small rural church out in the country. I've said before, you had to go toward town to go hunting. It was so far in the woods. First Sunday, we had 12 people, including me and my wife. And so it was a culture shock. I grew up in the city. I did not know anything about the country. I literally wrote in my journal, "Dear Lord, let me never be a pastor in a rural church in Mississippi," because not because I just thought I couldn't identify, and so it wasn't nothing against them or country churches or Mississippi. I just, that's not me, and so God answered the prayer. He said no, and so he sent me there, and so it was a great experience because I had to learn principles that continue on. Principle about people. You got 12 people, and it's a different world, and They had a different expectation, and I had a different expectation, and so the first time they showed me where the lawnmower was and said, "Pastor, we expect you to cut grass," and I thought they were joking, and I said, "Well, I don't have that much time as a weekend church kind of a deal. I was a seminary student." And I said, "All right, I'll do that. So which one of you will go door-to-door witnessing?" And they looked at one another. I said, "I can do one. You tell me which one you want. I'll cut grass, or I can go door-to-door." And so a man raised his hand and said, "Well, I can cut grass." And so he started cutting the grass, and I went every weekend, went door-to-door. And from that day on, they started taking turns cutting grass. The first time, the pastor always cut the grass.
Wow.
But I took Dickens with me.
Leadership lesson number 1 is know your strengths, and number 2, stay in your lane, and number 3, give others in the church options.
I gave them options, and I've been happy to cut grass, but and so that was part of the process because I knew nothing about country life. They made fun of me. I don't hunt. I don't fish. I didn't know anything about gardening. I was out of my element. And so they laughed at me a lot, and so I let them laugh at me, and so they taught me a lot about people and how to deal with people. I'm working on my doctorate degree, and for I think only one person had a college education.
Yeah.
But everyone could tear a motor apart, and everyone built their own house. They had skills I didn't have, and so it really was an interesting church to teach me about how to survive in a culture I didn't know about.
How long were you there, Brother Dan?
I was there 5 years.
Wow.
And surprisingly, every pastor had left after the second year.
Yeah.
So my second year, I finished the sermon, and two of the deacons stood up and said, "When are you leaving?" And I thought I was getting fired. I said, what are you talking about? And they said, well, pastors always leave after 2 years. This is your second year anniversary. I said, well, God hasn't called me away. And so I stayed 3 more years until God called me away. So we went from 12. When I left, they were running about 65.
Oh, wow. It's incredible. Well, they hate to see you go. How did you know it was time to go? How did it happen that you ended up leaving there?
I just knew internally. I'd been there, like I said, 5 years. I felt like they needed someone else for the next phase of ministry. And so I started praying. God releases us, I think, in some ways. I just knew. Still love the people, not angry. But I was about to go, surprisingly, to Nebraska. I had talked to a director of mission in Nebraska. He wanted me to come to a church start. And he said my connection with Alabama football would go well with Nebraska football fans. And he thought that would be something I could connect with. And so I said, give me 1 week and I'll give you an answer. And during that week, a church in Tuscaloosa County called. And so I started talking to them and ended up going to Tuscaloosa County. But I was about to go to Nebraska.
Nebraska would have been a culture shock. Brother Dan, how long between when you sensed that you were being released and then when you actually left, or that week that church reached out to you? What was the time frame, if you remember?
That one wasn't that long. It was only a few months.
Okay.
I just knew. I just knew in my heart it was time.
Did your wife know as well? Did Eileen know also?
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
She may have known it before I did, but
I think a lot of pastors really struggle with that. I'm sure you get that question a lot from pastors that you talk to. How do you know when it's time to go? And what you've described has always been my experience as well.
I think God does release us, but I always tell pastor it's called the peak to peak principle. We make decisions. Life is a peak and then a valley and then a peak and then a valley. You make decisions on the peak because you see further.
Okay.
What pastors do, they get in the valley and they try to make decisions, but they don't see anything. And what happens, they go from valley to valley to valley. If you can, on the peak, make decisions, you'll go from peak to peak to peak. And so I've always said that, every church I've left, it's been on the peak. So
you're giving really valuable insights. We ought to be charging for this. We're up to leadership lesson number probably 13 already, and we're about 10 minutes in. So let's talk a little bit about leadership, Brother Dan. You've been involved in Christian leadership for a good number of years. You also mentioned to me at one time you pastored University Church in Huntsville, Alabama.
Yes.
And so that's where aeronautic industry, where folks say you don't have to be a rocket scientist, but in fact everybody there is a rocket scientist. You said 80% of the congregation were engineers, and then now you're at First Baptist Lone Oak. How has it been different leading those two congregations?
Well, it's two different mindsets. Well, first of all, I've been a pastor of 4 churches. So my first church was a rural church in Mississippi, and I had to learn that culture. I went to Tuscaloosa, and that was a country church out in the country that became a suburb. Our cotton fields became neighborhoods. And so now I had two groups of people. I had city people and country people. But now I understood them because of what I did in Mississippi. Then I went to Huntsville, which is a city. We had a lot of PhDs. I remember one of my deacons missed a meeting because he was lecturing in Paris on quantum theory at a physics seminar. So that church, engineers believe process is as important as product. In other words, engineers must go through the process. So committees lasted a long time. We would meet 3 hours, sometimes 4 hours in committee meetings. I was at church many a night in committees. You had to talk it out. You had to let them figure out the process. When I got there, they basically said, we make the decisions. You're the pastor, but we make the decisions. Okay. And so I had to teach them to give me the authority to make decisions. And it took a while. It took a while before they finally said, Pastor, will you start making decisions? I come here, this church, where the leadership made all the decisions and the laity didn't. And so here I said, y'all have to make some decisions. So I had to teach this church to go through a process, to understand the process. Instead of saying, tell us what you want, have some skin in the game. So it's actually two different concepts to go from give me power to giving away power.
Well, that's so helpful because when a pastor's pastoring more than one congregation and is, he's in a second or third church, the tendency is to want to think the next place I'll do the same thing that I did there. But what you're describing is that just wouldn't have worked. The same approach would not have worked at Lone Oak that was required at Huntsville.
Literally in Huntsville, we had to buy some tables for the fellowship hall. It took 7 months. 7 months for the research, the design, talking about it. And it's like, I come here, it took 7 seconds.
Yeah.
We needed tables for fellowship hall. My associate pastor came in and said, we need some. Can I go buy some? I said, yes. And he said, fine. I started laughing. He said, well, what are you laughing? I said, I did it in 7 seconds here, what took me 7 months there.
Wow.
But it's a different mindset. But again, they had to go through the process. You couldn't, and I knew the end result. Every time I would tell the staff, this is the end result, but we've got to let them go through that process.
Well, Dan, pastors get in trouble sometimes when they want to lead in change, and they can see a need for a change. They can see something has to change. Sometimes churches have sacred cows, things they've been doing for a long time, traditions they've practiced, and a pastor may come in and have a really hard time with something that a church is doing. Has there been a time when you've had to lead in a change like that in one of the congregations that you served, and how did you lead change in a way that preserved the congregation?
Well, I think every church, you go through major changes. You got to know what's important, and you got to look at the long term. You can make short-term changes, but you won't be there long. And so for me, it's better to make 1,000 small changes and then make one big change and do nothing. And so it may be just tweaking this, tweaking that, tweaking something else. And most of the time, people don't even know it. Just a little, it's just minor. And then once you get used to it, you make another little change, There will come a time you got to make a big change. And when you make the big change, you better not make any other change. There's something called the change principle, which I believe in strongly. The change principle is when you're a leader, imagine someone gives you 100 pennies. Every time you do something smart, they give you a penny. So if you say hello to Tom Jones in the hallway, you got a penny. If you go see Aunt Susie in the hospital, you get a penny. You lose 5 pennies if you do something stupid. You don't say hello to Tom, you lost 5 pennies. You didn't go see Aunt Susie in the hospital, you lose 5 pennies. You got to know how much change you have constantly. You got to know how much change you have with your leadership and with the church. If you're going to make a major change, you better have a lot of change. Because if you only have 10 pennies, you better not make any changes. You got to build it up. It takes a long time to build up the change. It takes 5 seconds to lose the change.
Well, no question about it. Brother Dan, every leader has missteps, things that they at the time was not the best choice. And it's helpful for all of us to hear about those of others. So let's put you on the spot here. Any times when you made some leadership mistakes and then what happened as a result?
Probably early on, the one I remember, my first biggest one, my biggest one, I listened to one person and thought he had the authority to give me permission to do something. My first church, I had to go out of town. One of the key leaders said, don't worry about it. So I left town. What I didn't know was the person that was going to fill in for me didn't show up. He was supposed to get that person, and something happened. So I get back, and the church is mad at me. And I thought I had permission. I didn't go through the process. I didn't go through, and they didn't have a process. So I had to develop the process to say, all right, here's what we're going to do next time. So let's not run ahead. That was probably the biggest, and I lost a lot of change because the pastor wasn't there and nobody was there to preach. Yeah. And so I come back the next week and they're mad. And I could say, well, so-and-so told me I could, but now throw him under the bus. And so I took the heat, said, man, I made a mistake. I apologize from the pulpit. Went to individuals and said, look, I made a mistake. I promise you it won't happen again. I might make a lot of mistakes. I do not make the same mistake twice.
Well, that's a good thing. Not all of us can say that.
Yeah.
Hey, let's talk about evangelism. So I shared this with you as we got started. It was interesting to me. There are 33 churches in the Kentucky Baptist Convention that fit this category. So there's 2,360 churches that are affiliated with KBC. 33 churches that are in both the top 100 in baptisms per year and top 100 in cooperative program giving. First Baptist Lone Oak is one of those 33 churches that the congregation. So praise God for that. And the pastor is like the quarterback of a football team. He gets credit for things that he's not fully responsible for, but he also gets blamed for things that he didn't necessarily do. So praise the Lord for your leadership there. What do you do, Brother Dan, to help a congregation like First Baptist Lone Oak stay intentionally evangelistic?
We talk about it every service. We talk about it. I do an invitation every service. Through the year, we'll do sermons on evangelism. During our prayer time, we pray for lost people. Wednesday night prayer meeting, we'll pray for lost people. We celebrate when people give their life to Christ. And so I do a series every year on apologetics to teach people how to defend their faith. And also sometimes I will, like Vacation Bible School, a lot of times we'll do the plan of salvation, but then we'll tell the parents what we're doing. Well, what we're doing is telling the parents the plan of salvation.
Yeah, that's so
as
good.
Opposed to saying, hey, we're going to share Christ with you. We get all the parents together and we'll say, hey, let me tell you what we told your children this week, and the ABCs. And what we're doing is telling them what we told their children, but we're also sharing the faith. And so that we constantly talk about it. The Great Commission. You can't go a month in this church without hearing me talk about the Great Commission.
Brother Dan, you guys also have a side door ministry. You do Upward. Is it Upward Basketball?
Yes.
That you do?
Basketball, football, and soccer. Yeah.
And so that's a great chance to interact with families.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the gospel is being shared there, but you're also cultivating relationships. What's your part in Upward? What do you do?
Now or at the beginning. At the beginning, as we brought it in, I was the one who did the presentation when we had the big rally. I was the one who gave the gospel presentation at the beginning, and I was there at all the games encouraging. As we've gotten so many, I mean, we do it basketball, soccer, and football. There's no way I can go to everything, so we've delegated that. And so I still do the presentation, the gospel presentation at the end, and invite people to church. But we have great volunteers, and so we encourage them.
You have a great congregation and a great staff as well. Is there anything in particular that you see more evangelistic fruit from than other things, or is it just all the effort together you see folks come to Christ?
Probably all the efforts. At one time, Vacation Bible School was still the number one evangelistic tool. Then we went through a time where all the Upward, most of our evangelism came from Upward. Then last year went back to Vacation Bible School. So as far as the big ticket items, we share Christ in all the activities, all the events. There's going to be a time the gospel is presented somehow, maybe verbally or in written form, but the gospel will be presented.
I've heard your invitation at the end of a message. I've listened to you online a couple of times, and you do a really good job, by the way, on your invitation. Do you take the time to think through and write out the invitation part of the message? And if so, what are you trying to accomplish? What goes into crafting that invitation?
I want them to hear the gospel. There's actually two strategies the way I do it. I'm talking to lost people to hear the gospel. I'm talking to our people to know how to give the gospel. And so a few years ago, Joel Sutherland came to this area from the KBC. He was a pastor in Peavine in Georgia. And he said something I never thought of, because I was using different methods of invitation. He said, do the same way. Do the same way. And so for the last 2 years, I think, I've been doing the ABCs at the end. And to the point that our people know the ABCs of Christ.
That's really good. You're training folks to share the faith.
That's the goal, because and people actually have. I do know at least one case. Somebody was sharing the gospel with a relative, and they said the ABCs they remember, So, and I got that from Joel. That was great advice. But every sermon I sit down and ask, how can I take the sermon to an invitation somehow, from the sermon to Christ to the presentation of the gospel.
Joel was very effective in that. We took him across the state, and in fact, that's if anyone wants to find it, it's still available probably on KBC website somewhere. But he did a really good job of, regardless of what your message is, that he's bringing it to a conclusion, saying, this message was about marriage, and every marriage would benefit from the principles in this message. But the truth is, if you're not a follower of Jesus Christ, that's what you need most in your life. And however he would do it, he would transition from that message to a good, clear gospel invitation. I appreciate you mentioning him, Brother Dan. When you're able to share your faith and practice personal evangelism, where does that usually happen? I mean, in the church you pastor, you're 1,000 plus attendance, 1,200 in attendance. You have a large staff. A lot of your day is administrative. You're doing some visitation as well, I'm sure, hospital work. So it's hard to be around lost people when you're in a church building for a lot of the day. When do gospel conversations come up in your life?
It's funny because the irony is, the larger the church, the harder it is to share your faith. You would think it'd be the opposite, but you're right. I spend more time discipling our leaders and counseling administration. Paul said we do the work of an evangelist. It doesn't just happen. You got to work at it. When my kids were in school and they were involved in sports, I was always helping with sports, and I used that as an outlet. One of my daughter's teams, 70% of the people joined our church. I baptized a lot of her teammates. You got to find an outlet where lost people are. Not now because of COVID-19. But before, I work out at a local gym. I mean, we have a gym in our church. I don't work out here. I go out to a local gym to connect with people. Also, intentionally, when I talk to people, especially anybody comes in my office, for whatever reason, we're going to talk about Christ. And that seems simple, but I was amazed how many people did not know Christ. They come in talking about even a church member. We'll be talking, and I'll take it to a spiritual conversation, and I've been amazed how many people have not heard the gospel, as they just want to talk to a pastor about something. So I do a lot in my office. When people come in my office, when I go to a hospital, same thing. If I'm talking to people, I try to intentionally work in the conversation.
I'm hearing you say you have to be intentional. I had Kevin Smith on here last week, and Kevin referenced to he loves to ride a Harley. And so every day he's looking up at the sky. Is this a good day to ride a motorcycle? And so he's very intentional about motorcycle riding, and try to make the case that we have to be equally intentional in witnessing. For me lately, it's been a Thornton's gas station. We don't have access to our coffee pots here at the Baptist building, so we're having to bring it in from the outside. I'm not a coffee. I mean, I'm a coffee drinker, but just whatever's available is what I drink. And so I've had some good conversations. Had one this morning with a guy named Andre who cuts grass, and there are opportunities out there, but it's like you're saying, we have to be tuned in, and we have to be trying to have those conversations, looking for opportunities. The Lord will provide them.
If somebody comes to our house to do some work, that's a great opportunity. I don't tell them I'm a pastor at first. I'll talk about something else and try to lead them in that conversation about Christ. So.
Brother Dan, you work with a lot of pastors, and I know a lot of guys. You're there, and you're studying your office at First Baptist Lone Oak, and lots of pastors come to visit you and spend time with you. And you hear the same as I do, that pastors are experiencing burnout. We always have, but it seems to be ramped up right now. Mark Driscoll, who is you remember that name from a ways back. He was in Seattle. I think he might be pastoring again somewhere now. But he used to do this thing called Bread Truck Mondays. I'm not sure if you ever heard him say it or not, but he says there's some days where I think I could be doing anything other than pastoring a church right now. I could even be driving a bread truck. And he said, if I drove a bread truck, then folks would always be glad to see me. I would always smell like fresh baked bread, and life wouldn't be as difficult. Why do you think there's so much burnout in local church pastors?
I think, first of all, it's harder to be a pastor today. I was called in the ministry when I was in high school, so I've been called for 43 years, and so for 39 years I've worked at a local church, and for 36 years I've been a pastor. Yeah. So I've seen how difficult it is. It is more difficult. Our people are more scattered. social media, expectations. So all of that, no excuse, but it is more difficult than it used to be in some areas. The biggest problem, most pastors do not have a definition of success.
Okay.
So if you're a lawyer and you get your client off, you're successful.
Right.
If you're a police officer, you make the arrest, you're successful. If you're a politician, you get elected, you're successful. What is success for a pastor?
Yeah. What does a win look like?
Yeah, because we got to be careful. I mean, if we start saying so many salvations, well, William Carey spent 7 years without a salvation. Was he a failure? So we don't have a definition of success. Therefore, we can't judge ourselves. And so we're flying in the wind when somebody criticizes us or the numbers aren't there, and all of a sudden we feel like a failure, as opposed to you have to define your success. And the definition of success is to be a man of God. That's the definition. I will be a man of God. And so now, and my calling, those are the two things that keeps us steady in the ministry. Because numbers come and go, they go up and down. Be your best cheerleader will turn against you in 48 hours.
Yeah, somebody used to say, "Watch out for the family that picks you up at the airport when you come to preach at the new."
Oh yeah,
trust me, the new church. The first first place I went to, there was an older guy there named TP Scholler, and TP said, "Brother Todd," he said, "be careful of the folks that get closest to you the quickest." And he just had a lot of wisdom, and unfortunately, a lot of that proved to be true.
That is true. That is true.
I want you to unpack the man of God part. So, if folks see me doing something, I'm not distracted. I'm writing notes here. You mentioned a definition of success that included be a man of God and
fulfill your calling.
Yeah. And so on the calling part, if I understand what I think you're saying is that your ministry at a place is only as good as your calling to that place. There's got to be a certainty that God put you there, and then you got to hang on to that, because sometimes that's all you have is God called you. Unpack the part about being a man of God a little bit, if you would.
Well, there's a passage in Ezekiel where God tells Ezekiel, you're going to preach and no one's going to listen. They're going to attack you. It's going to be tough. It's going to be bad. And then he says, but let them know a man of God has been before them. That's success. Yeah. And so that involves our character, who we are, our walk with God. That becomes our foundation. Because if we have any other characteristics, if we have any other scorecard, we're going to get upset. Because what happens, pastors especially, we want people to like us. And so we try to do everything for everybody. And it's impossible to do everything.
Yeah. So you referenced Ezekiel and the man of God reference. I think it's Ezekiel 34 also, where the Lord talks about the shepherds and the things that the shepherds did not do, and the things that he himself would do. That's a good place to look also for that filling out that notion of being a man of God in a shepherding setting. Thank you so much for sharing that. So for you, has there been a time in ministry when you just kind of felt like quitting, when you're like, I'm not sure I can do this any longer? And what did you do?
A lot.
Every Monday?
No, I think there's two. Yeah, there are a lot of times you just want to quit.
Yeah.
But the calling, and I mean, the calling keeps me grounded. Yeah. We go through pity parties. We go through, I could do this better. I could do this. I could do this. I can go somewhere else. No one cares. No one loves me. I mean, that's just normal. But it's the calling that keeps us grounded. And we all do that. So that happens. I went through burnout one time in seminary. And so I went through physical burnout. And so I know what that feels like. And so that has protected me through the years. But I mean, that's a long story, but it really affected me. So I know what burnout feels like.
Tell us a little bit about it. Tell us a little bit about some physical symptoms, mental symptoms.
I was working on my doctorate degree. I was pastoring a church. And I had to take my qualifying exam, which, was 2 days of intense testing. I had to pass a French equivalent exam. So I am studying, I'm pastoring, and I'm working around the clock. I'm staying up 2 o'clock in the morning, getting up at 4 in the morning. Didn't take a vacation, having headaches, but I just thought it was because of sinus trouble down in New Orleans, and I was having stomach problems, and I thought, oh, that's just the Cajun food I'm eating, and my back was bothering me. Well, I really hadn't been working out, and then one day I came home and I threw my briefcase on the bed, and it fell off the bed, and I reached down to pick it up, and I started crying, and I couldn't stop crying.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm on the floor crying for 2 hours, and it scared me because I have no idea why I can't stop crying. And I wanted to get in the car and drive west.
Wow.
That made no sense to me. And the only thing I didn't, because of God and my wife. I thought, God doesn't want me to do it, and I don't want to leave my wife.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know what was going on. The next day I was talking to one of my professors, and he said, that's burnout. And I said, what are you talking about? And so I started reading everything I could about burnout, and realized I wasn't taking care of myself physically, emotionally, spiritually. I did everything wrong.
Yeah.
So fast forward, when I got my doctorate of theology degree that year, my mom was diagnosed with 3 brain aneurysms. My mother-in-law died of cancer. I had surgery. We had a baby. Everything was going wrong, but I didn't have burnout, and I was still pastoring because I knew how to take care of myself. I knew some ways to relax, and so burnout is real. I mean,
no question.
It's very real.
What are some guardrails that you have in place now, Brother Dan, to protect you specifically from burnout? What are some things you do?
Again, I'm not doing so well in COVID-19. I do work out. I watch. I'm very health conscious. I know when to take a break. I know my body when I'm physically tired, and I'll just say, "Hey guys, I got to take off a couple of days. I got to go by myself somewhere." I have an accountability partner. He lives, and he lives in another state. I give him a call. We'll just talk and stuff like that. I've given permission to 3 people if they see symptoms in me. They can say, "Hey, you need to stop." At the church. So
that's good. That's important. Well, so not only is burnout an issue, moral failure is an issue in ministry, and moral failure can take on all different kinds of expressions. You have a shelf in your library, in your study of books written by authors who are no longer in ministry. Is that correct?
It started out as a joke, and now it's almost a chef and a half.
Tell us.
One of my heroes. There's a man. I bought a book and read it in the ministry, and he had a moral failing. And so I took the book and I put it on a shelf, and I told my wife, that's going to be the shelf of the guys who had moral failings. I didn't think anything about it. And then a couple of weeks later, I had another guy. And through the years, I will move books out of my library to that shelf. And now, like I said, it's almost a shelf and a half of pastors that I admire or respected. They're now, at moral failings. It's a reminder when I look at that. When I look at it,
pastors get in trouble for a number of different reasons. I think it was. I'm trying to think of the Richard Foster had written a book on spiritual disciplines, a classic, but they also did one on areas of failure, I think, in the Christian life, and it was sex, power, and money were the three big ones where people get in trouble. What are some guardrails in your life to protect you from those kinds of things?
I think you just have principles. For example, I don't do counseling with anyone more than 3 times. Women, if they after 3 times is really anybody, I guess, because after 3 times, if I can't help you, you need someone else. Anyone who sees me has to have an appointment with my secretary. My secretary keeps my calendar. I'm very careful where I go. People know where I am. I'm almost never, I won't say I'm almost never alone, but when I'm eating out by myself, I'm beyond careful. Stuff like that. I have to be. My wife has access to everything. I come home, I lay my cell phone down. She can look at anything. She has all my passwords. If she ever wants to check anything, she has full permission to do so.
Some folks would call that rigid. Others would, smart people would call that survival in ministry, because you have an enemy that just wants to. We have an enemy that wants to see all of us fall and mess up. Well, Brother Dan,
the biggest problem is when leaders get isolated, they get lonely.
Yeah.
The moment they get lonely, they become arrogant. And the moment they become arrogant, there's an addiction coming. If you keep that addiction, you'll have adultery.
Wow.
And that's Archibald Hart said that a long time ago, and I'll always remember that. When you isolate yourself, all the problems start happening. And you see that when guys think, I don't need anyone. Hey, you don't have to tell me what to do. No, I'm the pastor of a large church, or I'm a pastor, whatever. The arrogance comes. And when the arrogance comes, there will be an addiction of passion, power, or prestige, possession. It'll be some kind of addiction. And then if you're not careful, then it goes right into it.
Well, Dan, that's really interesting that you said that and took it from that perspective, because the opposite is also true. So you're describing an isolation from a place of arrogance, but an isolation from a place of insecurity and failure leads exactly the same way.
It does.
I'm old enough, and you are too, to remember the old National Geographic shows, and you'd see the wildebeest out there. The one that the hyenas go after is the one that's wounded and by himself, and they take him down. And no doubt Satan finds isolated people, whether it's from arrogance or whether it's from failure and self-pity, and it comes at us in that place of isolation.
They did a study years ago asking pastors who had moral failings, tell us about your life. And I think there's like 3,000 pastors. What they found, the pastor that did not have a friend, or did not have an accountability partner, pastor that did not have a quiet time, and the pastor who said, that will never happen to me. Those are the only three common denominators of 3,000 pastors.
Wow.
And so as pastors, we got to have a quiet time. We got to have an accountability partner, and say it can happen to any of us.
Yeah.
It can happen to any of us. And
no question.
I'm always scared when I hear a guy say, it won't happen to me. I'm thinking, yeah, you're in danger.
Moving on from there, criticism is part of the ministry. So Ron Edmondson, who once pastored Emmanuel in Lexington, made this statement about criticism. He said, criticism accompanies leadership. We shouldn't be surprised when it comes, especially when we are leading change. How do you respond to Ron's statement about criticism? Is it part of the job?
Every leader is going to get criticized. I mean, there's no way, because a leader makes change. Change equals friction. Friction equals criticism. Jesus was criticized. The perfect man, the perfect person, the sinless one was criticized.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get criticized. Some of it will be true. Some of it will not be true. Whatever you do will be criticized. COVID-19, we're criticized because we're not having 100% open the church. We're being criticized because we haven't closed the church. I'm hearing both sides. Whatever we do, and I tell pastors, whatever you do, you're going to be criticized. That's something you're going to have to learn to live with. It was hard early in my ministry. I hated criticism. Well, I still don't like it, but I really hated it, and it bothered me. I mean, it really. And then after decades of being criticized, you start realizing you're going to get criticized.
So tell us about a time when you received some criticism, warranted or unwarranted, either one, and it really just got the best of you. Can you remember? What did you experience? Did you carry it around with you all day? Did you think about it a lot?
Yeah, I think we all do that. I'm still this way. I can get 1,000 cards saying great job, and then one card that was terrible, and I go on a spin dive for a little bit. I have a pity party. Sometimes I'll put the timer on the microwave, for 3 to 5 minutes, and just pout.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then it goes off. I say, all right, time to move on.
Time's up.
I had one time, but sometimes the criticism is valid.
Right, absolutely.
So I take every criticism, I evaluate it. I mean, I look at it, is this really true?
Yep.
And those are the hard ones when someone criticizes, and I have had that. I've had somebody criticize me. I didn't like it. And I thought, oh my goodness, they're right.
Yeah.
And they were a thorn in my flesh. There was another church, thorn in my flesh, everything. They tried to take over my ministry. It was bad, but they had a criticism that was spot on.
Wow.
And I went to them and said, "You're absolutely right. I am so sorry." So,
well, there is a toxic kind of criticism, which is not helpful, and it's from a toxic type person. But a couple of things that I'd read recently, I went back and looked at a blog post that Ron had put out, and a couple of things I heard him say I thought were helpful. One is consider the source. Is it a person that's just constantly critical, or is it someone that's generally supportive of your work and they're saying something? And then a second thing is consider the content. That is there, maybe the whole thing's not true, but is there a kernel of truth in what's being said? That's what I hear you saying. And so you can benefit from criticism.
Oh, you can. And I'll take another step. You got to ask, is it a person or the crowd?
Okay.
I mean, is everybody saying it or just one person saying it?
Oh, that's helpful. Yeah.
And is the criticism to help me or to hurt me?
Mm-hmm.
That's important. If the criticism is to help me be better, I had a man who pulled me aside in my second church. I was doing business meeting. I was doing it wrong, and he was right. I mean, he just said, "Hey, you're saying this phrase, and you shouldn't say this phrase."
Yeah.
And my first thought was, "What do you know about business meetings?" And I realized, oh, he's right. But he was doing it to help me. So if I have others, I know they're trying to hurt me, but I still take it. I'll evaluate it and say, all right, maybe God is speaking through this person, and we'll deal with it. And if it's not, then we'll move on.
That's what King David said. Maybe I deserve this when the guy was cursing him, throwing stones at him. Well, Dan, we've not talked about anything very controversial, so let's talk about politics for just a minute. We are in an election cycle and a presidential election cycle, and Christians are not immune from getting caught up in the political atmosphere. And folks have strong opinions all the time, but it seems especially so right now. So, just on the subject of a local church pastor, if you wear a mask, you must be this liberal person who's left wing. If you don't wear a mask, you obviously don't love people. And so everything seems very polarized right now. Sometimes politics makes its way into the church. Do you preach about politics to your congregation?
Not in the way you're asking. I preach on morality. I have no problem preaching on morality. I have no problem preaching on biblical text, and if it applies, it applies. Early in my ministry, again, of over 36 years as a pastor, I tell the church, I will not endorse a party, and I will not endorse a person. I'll never. And you will not hear me be critical from the pulpit of either one. But I will speak on morality. And if it applies, it applies. So that just happens. And so that has helped through the years. So on some issues, I have said, even during COVID-19, we do something on Wednesday night online, and I'll give an address to the church when wearing masks is not a political issue. It's not. And quit saying that. It's if you don't want to wear one, fine, but don't put it in the political realm. Yeah. And so let's be honest. And so that I might be more critical of both parties, but I don't call them out. I'll just say, let's look at the facts. Let's look at some issues. But
do you ever announce? So you've already said you don't announce your preference for a candidate. Do you ever address any of those political issues on social media?
Rarely. No, I don't.
Yeah.
Again,
why is that?
You're not going to win. You're not going to win. The moment you do it, you're labeled by a group of people. They're not going to listen to anything else you say. So I stay with the biblical response. I stay with the morality response. Now, I've been accused. I recently did something on Twitter, and someone said, "Oh, you're talking about so and so." Well, if it applies, I wasn't thinking about so and so. But the statement is a true statement, So I will never say, politician A, here's what you need to know. That's just not me. I made a decision. That was a decision I made years ago based on what Billy Graham said. Billy Graham endorsed. He was around Richard Nixon, and things came out after Watergate. And Billy Graham said, if I had my ministry to do over again, I would not endorse or be associated with a person or a party.
Yeah.
And so I made that decision. Now, in Huntsville, I had a member of the Republican Party and a member of one of the highest Republican Party and one of the highest Democrat Party in my church. And we got along great. And there was a moral issue that one of them disagreed with. Now, I preached on the moral issue, and I got criticized because how dare you preach that while he's sitting there? I didn't talk about him. I didn't talk about the politics behind it, but everybody knew it was something they were going to vote in Alabama that I said, here are 10 reasons, biblical reasons why this is wrong. But I called him and said, but he knew me. He said, man, you need to preach it. I did.
Yeah.
So
it's a difficult day. Brother Dan, you're a big reader. The library, the shelves behind you attest to that. And I've been in your office before and know that those shelves go over to your left shoulder and keep going. And then there's another room nearby that's also filled with books. I understand that you're a natural speed reader. So how did you discover that about yourself?
I went to take a speed reading course, and what they do, they flash words up and see where you are. And I was doing it naturally. The fastest they had, I cannot read individual words. So if I see 5 words, I see the 5 words. I cannot proofread. I'm terrible at proofreading because I have to read backwards to see individual words. And so they said, you're one of the few people that can naturally see groups of words with content. So I can read pretty quickly.
So you were reading a lot of books at one time. I understand. What are some books you're reading right now?
I've just finished Frederick Douglass biography by Blight, and I'm reading the biography of Grant Chernoff, I think his name is, those are both 800-page books, so it's going to take me a little longer from those. Just finished Henry Cloud's book, Necessary Endings, which is excellent.
Yeah, great book.
Oh, I'm probably will look at it again. I'm reading a book on stress called Stress Effect by Dick Thompson. He was a former Special Force soldier who got his PhD in psychology, and he specializes in stress and military and police and how stress affects our brains. So those are some of the books I'm reading now.
Any books that you're recommending to folks right now?
Necessary Endings by Henry Cloud. If you are getting to retirement age, or if you have a staff, because he talks about when do you end things. And it's very helpful, very, very, very practical. So that's the book I'm probably recommending to most people right now.
A few years ago, you recommended this book to me, so I was visiting, and you recommended Leadership Pain, and I read it pretty quickly. Sam Chand is the author. His premise is that your tolerance for pain sets the ceiling for your ministry. I think it's pretty much what he's trying to say. And I love it that I've given lots of copies of this book away. I've said Dan Summerlin recommended it to me. I read it, and everyone that's read it, Brother Dan, kind of has the same thing to say, is that he's spot on about how God uses pain to shape us for ministry and prepare us. Has that been your experience?
I've given that book out to many people, and I think it's totally right. Your tolerance of pain will determine the level of leadership you'll have, and it will keep you from having leadership. And we have to go through pain. I don't care who you are. You're going to have to go through pain, loneliness, whatever, and for the next level. And we see that biblically too. So
stories in the book are incredible. The personal testimonies from guys, and so this next question, you don't agree with everything about every book that you read, is that right?
Oh no, I don't. I'll read books by atheists. Sure. I read a lot of books I don't agree with, and when I do that, I want to argue with the author, and so I might read something, and how would I address him if I was sitting across the table with him? Now, if someone makes a statement, I would say, so when I read somebody I don't agree with, or they give an illustration I don't like, I will actually stop and write out, how I would debate that person.
Oh, wow. So, Brother Dan, you've been involved in SBC life for a long time. You were former KBC president, and you've been involved in Kentucky Baptist Convention work a great deal, and you're still involved in all those areas. What do you see right now that's encouraging in our larger work?
Well, I know some of the leaders now. I mean, I actually know them personally. Like Paul Chitwood and Kevin and Adam Greenway. So I actually know some people like that. I'm excited about a couple of things. Our leadership, I think, is still strong. I think that's encouraging. I'm encouraged by a lot of young pastors who are coming up and asking good questions. I think that's encouraging.
Like what? What would be an example of some good questions you hear young pastors asking?
Why are we doing this?
Yeah.
We're in a changing world, and the same thing for the church and any organization. Just because we're doing something we've always done doesn't necessarily mean we should keep doing it. Right. So we're having a lot of young pastors asking the question, why are we doing it this way?
That's helpful.
And that scares some people. I get it. But in leadership, you've got to ask those questions. We're seeing that in COVID-19. COVID-19 has forced everyone to ask the question, why were we doing it that way? And so same thing at SBC. So I think those are some good questions. There will always be controversy. Where 2 or 3 Baptists are gathered together, there'll be an argument, as I've always said.
Or my favorite is where 2 Baptists are gathered together, there'll be 3 opinions, and both of those are true.
But I remember going to a convention where people literally moved because I voted against them. I would be sitting there, and I remember one time a family sat with me, and they said, "Now, who you're going to vote for president?" And I said, "Well, I'm voting for so and so." And they called me a name and got up and moved.
Wow.
I remember those days when it was a war zone at the convention.
Yeah.
So
social media making it better or worse?
Well, worse.
Yeah.
It's good that we have more information, but the problem with social media, you don't have to be a leader to have a voice.
Yep.
And you can say anything and people believe it. You can tweet anything and put anything on social media, and now there's people are trying to be who can be the most sarcastic.
Yeah. And
now we're rewarding sarcasm.
And one of the things I see, there's some articles that are written, and I wouldn't call the name of the blog post or there are 2 or 3 different ones of them, and they show up at various times, circulated on Facebook and maybe even through Twitter, and they'll make an accusation against a leader in SBC or about something or another, and there's a kernel of truth in it, but then you read the article and it's not completely true. And it's a little bit sensationalized. Does that ever make its way into leaders that you talk to or into your church?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I get questions all the time. Is this true? Is this true? People make appointments and they'll bring the article. During Deacon's meeting, a lot of times I will address those issues. This is not true. This is not a true statement. I mean, I'll tell them about, certain organizations, certain people, they have an agenda. Be careful when you see certain names. Doesn't mean, going back to criticism, they can still be right on some things, but you just got to be careful and ask, what is the benefit from it?
Yeah.
What is the benefit?
Well, that's helpful. So, what do you say to a young leader who just says, "Brother Dan, this is just too much fussing for me. I've got enough problems. I'm not sure I really want to be involved in SBC life. I think our church may just pull away and do its own thing." How would you counsel someone like that?
If they said it that way, I would say there is still nothing out there that competes with the cooperative program in the international mission field. Nothing. Yeah. The concept of pooling our money, the sending missionaries out, I think it's worth it. I think it's worth. Yeah, we're going to have some fussing. I'm preaching through the book of Acts, and kind of amazing. Those guys, they argued with one another. They had some issues, went face to face, went nose to nose, disagreeing on some things. We're always going to have disagreement.
That's always been the case, and it needs to be. We need to engage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's like a marriage.
Yeah.
Ending the marriage is not the answer. Let's work through the issues.
And there's a principle I learned in the secular world, and I'll always remember in a history class. To have power, you have to have an enemy.
Mm.
And so always watch the people who's trying to make an enemy of somebody, because they probably want power.
That's interesting.
And in the church level, the secular level, nations, whatever, I'll make an enemy of so-and-so group. Now I get more followers. Now I have power.
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of power. And so we got to be careful. We can be critical. We should be critical of some things. I have no problem
Absolutely.
with that. We have a methodology of being critical. But if the person who's just critical in order to get more power, then that's an issue.
Well, I would say this in an encouraging note. In Kentucky, June receipts for the cooperative program were $1,887,209.59, which was the highest CP month since January of this year.
Wow.
So Kentucky Baptists once again are voting through the offering plate, and even though the offering plate's coming through in a whole lot of different ways right now, and Kentucky Baptists are saying we still value 3,800 International Mission Board missionaries. We value church planting. We value things like Sunrise, Clear Creek, Oneida, and everything else that we're trying to do together. Doesn't mean we don't have issues to work through, because I think we do. And I agree with you. I think we have a system that allows us to work through them. Sometimes folks need to figure out the system or be invited into it. But Dan, let's talk about COVID-19 just for a second. How I think I saw on Twitter the other day that you had a picture of Raymond from Everybody Loves Raymond falling down on the floor, and said how you felt after preaching 5 sermons in one weekend. Are you doing 5 services right now?
Not now. In July, we moved it back. We have a Saturday night service, and then we have 2 services on Sunday morning, and we do an online service at Sunday night. Okay. But early on, we had a Saturday night service, then at 8:30, 11 o'clock, and 1:30, and then a Sunday night online only. We did that. I mean, that's what we did at 33% capacity with social distancing. We figured out how many adults should come, and so we arranged it that way. They didn't come that many, but we wanted to have a place for everybody. So that's what we did short term.
So whatever normal we get back to at some point, it's going to be a new normal.
Yeah.
Prior to COVID restrictions, where Lone Oak was, First Baptist. How long do you think before you're kind of back in that direction?
2021.
Yeah. So
I told our ministers in April, first week of April, I said, guys, we're in a marathon. I've watched how people are responding. There are some ingrained characteristics that took on. I did some funerals during this time, and I watched how people did social distancing after 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. There's a fear factor out there. That's not going to go away overnight. Yep. We got people who say, "Oh, open the church," but then they're not coming. We got another group, for large churches, 25 to 40% may come because of habit. I hate to say that, but they're out of the habit.
Right.
We got to get them back in the habit. It's going to be a while to get them back. Statistically, we should have another surge in the fall, and that's based on what's happening in the Southern Hemisphere. I don't care what Fox, I don't care what CNN says. I'm looking at medical documentation and talking to missionaries and talking to scientists I know who are studying this. So I think it's going to be a long process before we're back to whatever normal. So
we just have to stay faithful and keep finding fresh and creative ways to minister. The Lord's shaking His church up, and we need to be faithful during this time. Dan, I'm grateful for you.
Let me say, I tell you what COVID-19 has done. COVID-19 is a magnifying glass to show us who's healthy. It's showing healthy churches and unhealthy churches. It's showing healthy families and unhealthy families. Showing healthy businesses, unhealthy businesses, and showing healthy people and unhealthy people. We're seeing that in businesses. We're seeing it in churches. Some churches are doing fine. Some are hurting. But the pastors have told me, well, we were struggling before this. Yeah. Families, more and more families are having trouble. They were already having issues. Even ministers, I know some ministers who are not handling this well at all. but they've admitted to me. They say, I struggle with some issues like this. So I think it's revealed to us who's healthy and who's unhealthy. Now, we're not careful, the healthy people will become unhealthy. That's the danger for the future.
Folks have to take care of themselves. So you're actually thinking that we're going to see some more fallout as the year goes on. Business closing, probably some churches closing, maybe some pastors leaving the ministry.
I think, I think we're going to see we're going to see many pastors leave the ministry before this is over. We're going to see many churches fire their pastors. They have an excuse now. I think businesses are going to struggle, depending on their business plan. For what it's worth, I'm not a prophet, but I don't see the government doing another shutdown. I don't think the people would stand for it. So there'd be something new out there they could try, but I don't see that happening again. But just the natural progression of some guys are having trouble preaching to a handful of people.
Yeah.
Because, and I've talked to many guys who say, I only have so many people. I need a big crowd. Yeah. And I said, well, you've been preaching to a crowd, not to hearts. Mm. Preaching to hearts, it makes no difference who's there. So,
Brother Dan, I could talk to you for another hour or 2 hours. I'm grateful for you. I appreciate you, your friendship, your ministry at First Baptist Lone Oak. It's a great church in West Kentucky, a great Kentucky Baptist church. I appreciate that you meet with pastors in your study. Folks may not know there's a group of young pastors that have been coming to hang out with you for a long time, and they benefited from your ministry. So thank you for taking the time to join us. How can we pray for you?
Well, I think pray for all churches as we continue. I was telling you earlier, I told our church, COVID-19 is like you bat right-handed. Now you're in the World Series and they want you to bat left-handed.
I hate that illustration.
The mechanisms are there. You know the principles, but you don't have the muscles, memory. And so we're all looking at different ways. What does it mean? What's the new metrics? How do we look at our churches? We went through one metric. Now is there another metric? So just pray as we go through all this, and pray that I stay healthy like everybody else.
I'm gonna take your illustration and end on this note. You've said that it's like that you're betting left-handed or you bet right-handed, and at the World Series they're asking you to bet left-handed. So James 1 verse 2 says, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into," King James says, "divers temptations," others say various trials. This is a trial, and we need to somehow, by the grace of God, decide that God's doing something in it. He's sanctifying us. James goes on to say that God promises wisdom, that he'll tell us what to do if we'll seek his face and look to him, and that there's a crown that comes, according to verse 12, to those who endure. So God rewards faithfulness. Brother Dan, I thank you again for your time. I want to pray for you, and we'll close out this time. Dear Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for your grace. Thank you, Lord, for so many good things that we've talked about. Lord, thank you for calling men to answer the assignment of pastoring a local church. I'm thankful for Brother Dan Summerlin that you've called him to serve at First Baptist Lone Oak. I pray for him, dear Lord, for health, and for him, for the church, for all the churches in Kentucky and all of our pastors. But I also pray, Lord God, Deuteronomy 1:11 over his life, that you'll multiply him and make him 1,000 times as many more as he is right now, that you'd bless him as you've promised. Father, teach us to walk close with you and to serve your people in a way that honors the Lord Jesus Christ. Help us to stay faithful, to make the adjustments and the changes that we need to make, that we might honor Jesus with the entirety of the whole life you've given us. We pray this together in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you, Brother Dan.
Thank you.